In this build series, I'm going to be making this solid wood two-step stool that has some fairly interesting joinery. I'm going to go through the entire process step by step in these videos, and I've also included plans that you can download and print that'll give you the dimensions to go by to build your own. Now, the wood that I use is ash. I selected a darker piece from the stock that I had, but you can use any type of wood, even soft wood. However, if you're going to go to the trouble of cutting these fairly complicated joints, I figure it's worth getting a good looking hardwood. You do want to make sure that you're using well-seasoned wood. Ideally, you would take the piece of wood, because it's just a single board after all, and bring it into your house for maybe 2 weeks to let it acclimate to the humidity level inside, and then bring it out to your shop and start the project. I'm going to talk a little bit about the tools that you need. I went with all power tools, although it's entirely possible to build this with hand tools only. Of course, a table saw to cut the material. I started with rough lumber, so I needed a surface planer. Since all the parts that I used here are short, and the board that I started with was relatively flat, I didn't bother wheeling out my jointer to flatten one side. I did all of the machining operations to flatten the stock on my planer. Any solid wood project requires quite a bit of sanding, and I used a random orbit sander along with a sanding block to do the hand sanding. And the grits that I used were 100 to begin with, then 220, and that did the bulk of all the sanding. I didn't really go beyond that, except for a couple of instances where I used 320 grit, and I go into more detail on that later in the build. I also use my miter saw to cut the parts to length and also make these angle cuts down on the bottom here, but these could easily be done on the table saw as well. I use my bandsaw to make the notch cut in the ends of the stretchers, but you could also use a handsaw to make those cuts. Of course, I use a variety of hand tools as well: chisels, hand planes, combination square, measuring tape, and pencil. All fairly common tools you'll find in the average workshop. You'll also need some clamps, and for the most part I use my homemade ones. These smaller ones are great for the shorter distances, and I also use my longer bar clamps in areas where the smaller ones wouldn't work. For fastening the project together, of course, no nails or screws were used. This is all held together with joinery that was glued with either polyurethane construction adhesive or regular wood glue. Finishing is largely going to be a matter of your preference. I used oil. However, you can do what you want. You can leave it plain without any finish, or you can even paint it if that's your thing. I do recommend getting something on there though to help protect it and keep it looking good.